Hello, very beautiful community. We are going to talk about small picture, but then also harder, difficult, big picture stuff about the election. And I'm going to test your patience with this set of big picture remarks, because in the run-up to the election, it may not be what your nervous system wants to hear, but it's my responsibility to try, and it's okay for me to fail. It's my job to fail. So let's start with the small picture and the rather implosive week and set of days that Trump's been having. I don't think the Harris campaign has been doing impeccably the last couple of weeks. I think there are two central faults. One is a return to Biden's discourse about Trump being a threat to democracy, which initially they let go of, substituting it with discourse about freedom and not being weird. And the second issue is the gaffe by President Biden, who implied that Trump supporters may be garbage. And Biden's ethical responsibility there isn't that he did the slip, which isn't as bad as the Hillary deplorables comment, but it could do damage. But it's that he is the president of the United States without the mental faculties to discipline his speech. So that's what Biden is responsible for. The fact that the slip happened is just a byproduct of the situation that he is in. And as you know, if you're new to me, I actually think Biden has been a very efficacious president, but his communicative skills are declining significantly. But everything is relative, right? If I'm a C- on the Harris campaign overall, I'm an E to an F on the Trump campaign. And this is not about who's good, who's bad. This is purely about efficacy toward victory. Trump has physically threatened Liz Cheney. Trump has had the Puerto Rico comedy calamity at the rally, which is an inevitable byproduct of the ludicrous idea of trying to mix insult-based stand-up with a political event. RFK has come out and said he's going to be in charge of everything medical. Musk has said that the middle class will suffer initially as a result of Trump's economic policy. And having been persuaded to take a careful look, I do now think that unlike the positive McDonald's stunt, the waste disposal truck stunt backfired for Trump significantly, because virility is central to Trump's USP, and he looked frail and inept trying to get into that thing. We have seen the markets move a little bit away from Trump, and we have seen the bookmakers move a little bit away from Trump in the last couple of days. That doesn't mean that he is going to lose, but this is positive, as is the palpable return of a modicum of confidence in the Harris campaign when they're looking at female turnout, some early voting stats as well. But having said a little bit about this, I want to say a few big picture things with your permission that are a case of me being mean to you when your nervous systems are wound up in this run-up to this close election. By the way, just quickly, why am I a C- on the Harris campaign? It's because there are certain leadership skills Harris doesn't have, number one. Number two, she hasn't defined America's future enough, and she hasn't defined herself enough. I'll talk more about that another time. But again, C- is only bad if your opponent's doing well, but Trump's at an E to an F, which is a kind of normal. And it's a kind of normal because we're in the age of the populist buffoon. We're going to be in the age of the post-truth, hard-nosed, disciplined populist politician in the 2030s. So these are going to be harder to take on than the ill-disciplined, erratic Trump, who struggles even to have political beliefs. He has just dispositional states. But let's do big picture stuff. The two trends, and I want to talk about one of them, albeit they're connected. One trend is the withdrawal of the West from a capacity to effectively project power on the global stage. But the second trend is conflict increasingly shifting from a dimension of conflict between opponents to a place of conflict between enemies in our democracies. So we're talking about a kind of circle that was like this in 1999, and it's now like this, and it's going to get like that. It will not get as wide as it has historically got, but it's going to widen. And that means the return of historically normal discourse, like enemies within, cultural purity, vermin. And immediately 38.4% of you feel, no, that's not allowed, that we've gone beyond that. Well, it's certainly not illegal for you to say that. But you may be trying to cling on to ground beneath you that isn't as solid as you need it to be. Because we're coming out of a relatively amicable historical bubble and experiencing a certain reversion to history as normal, in which these sorts of things and a wider circle is more routine, and the narrower circle, which we experienced for a while in the West, is more an historical exception, which requires particular social conditions to sustain itself. And when these wobble, the situation changes. So it's going to be very important that this will require dignity and discipline from you. This is true if Harris wins, right? That circle will keep on expanding, because we're moving into a difficult and different historical moment. But it's going to require dignity and discipline and self-love from you, because there's going to be people treating you like an enemy. And you're going to need to have the discipline to not necessarily treat them like an enemy back, unless they treat you like an enemy in a very, very particular way. That is, direct threats of violence or practical attempts to break the democratic game. The instinct is to say, no, that's not allowed because we only do this. You know, this is the game of tennis we're having. You can't throw balls at my head. But in political terms, people have thrown balls at their heads, at each other's heads, historically. And we're going to have to make do. Because it is tempting to say, well, I'll just go like this. And if I go like this, it'll mean that what's happening will stop happening, but it won't. Because you can't stand up and just get away from the table of politics, or pretend that the table of politics is narrower than it really is, unless you secede or emigrate. Right? You're stuck. And so we've been here, and we're now here, and in the 2030s and 40s we're going to be here. What inspiration can we take to help us with this? There are two forms of inspiration. One is inspiration from our own societies in the past that went through a lot. Humans, whatever age you are, whether you're 19 or 90, your grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents went through quite significant historical uncertainty, even in your societies that have been, in most of the cases of folks watching, relatively peaceable recently. So we can draw inspiration from the resilience and hope of humans in the past in our own countries. We can also draw inspiration from places around the world today who have a wider circle than we're going to have, because the chances are most of our democracies will sustain and things will be difficult, with a democratic existential risk that it'll likely not materialize in the cases of most Western democracies. So we could even look to a country that we talk about often, that is Rescue Land. And now in Rescue Land, we have a situation where a very large minority of the population thinks of Stalin what you and I think of Stalin. But a majority of the population, arguably, has a very different view. To us, that would be like fundamental disagreement about mid-20th century Germany, and you living in a society today in which most people thought approvingly of mid-20th century Germany. Imagine how extraordinary that would be for you. Well, in a certain sense, the Russians are in that predicament around Stalin. So that is very, very toxic, very culturally sick. And that's a very wide circle, right? Well, you're talking about this guy who took out a whole bunch of my family, who were repressed, somebody might say, and the other person might say, no, it is the best thing since sliced bread, right? So we're never going to get to that. But we can learn from much more intense versions of the pathologies we're going to have to deal with. This was really a difficult conversation. I'm going to give myself an F, because I think I probably wouldn't have got through with that conversation starting it at such a tricky and sort of nervously activated historical moment. But I tried. It's cool for me to fail, because I'll get to a B minus with this point later. Lots and lots of love. I was about to make the joke at the start of this chat that all my sitting up time I spend with you. But I tried to sit up with my funny jumper, and it just didn't work. But I'm grateful that I've managed to get through this conversation, and that you've stayed with me in this semi-horizontal mode. Lots of love till very soon. You notice I'm here more than once a day now in the election run-up, and that's because trying to keep our cool.